Hi, good morning to the Taming the Polar Bears presentation and talk Q&A session on what I hope will be a new understanding of this wide, weird mental experience that falls under the general umbrella of depression. No, I don't see any viewers yet, so I just have to fill the air here for a while. Oh, there's 2 viewers. So I'm just going to go over, anybody who's familiar with me knows that briefly is a challenge for me, but I'll just try to go over briefly what I talked about in the lecture, we'll call it, and the companion post where I kind of summarized some of the talking points. Now, something that occurred to me in the time since I recorded that and now was, and I was reminded of this morning, I just kind of want to fill in a little bit about my background for the list of symptoms and possible factors. I just want to assure people that I don't pull these out of my hat. My main source of information for a lot of this, and I consider him, he doesn't know this, but I consider him my professor and my mentor, is Professor Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University. If you look him up, you will see he is ranked as the top 15 neuroscientist in the world. Out of thousands and thousands of neuroscientists, he is ranked number 15. He is considered one of the world's leading experts in neurobiology. He is considered one of the world's leading experts in neurobiology and how it creates human behavior. And he is the leading expert in my favorite topic regarding psychiatric and mood disorders, stress, the stress response system, the neurobiology of stress, the effects of stress and all that. So I read enormous amounts of his material. I watch his lectures. I understood a lot of what he was talking about and what he teaches before. He's just the best I found at gathering like mind-boggling amounts of science and data and information and putting it. He is a teaching professor. You can Google him and find lots of his lectures, classroom lectures online, and I watch those a lot. But that's where a lot of what my previous lecture was actually a bit of a model on one of his lectures. I took most of his symptom talking points. I added 1 or 2 that he missed out. And I have my personal insight and thoughts on all of those things. But basically, somebody's joking here about my briefly, and I know. So that's a little bit of the basis, possible factors as well. I've added 1 or 2 that he hasn't spoken of in his lectures that I know are quite significant. The other aspect, an important talking point and thing to understand about this whole thing called depression, and I think it's really, really important, is and this is what I learned from Sapolsky in his one lecture on depression. And this I loved him when I heard him say this, because when I started the Bears, those of you know my story, I have enormous amount of experience in psychiatric care. I have enormous amounts of experience in the care of psychologists, working with psychologists. And Sapolsky's lecture, he makes it very clear If you don't understand these points of neurobiology, you're not going to understand depression. If you only understand these psychological aspects of depression, you're not going to understand depression. So that was like just music to my ears, because that was the huge frustration that was the whole basis for starting the Polar Bears and all I do. So that's the point I kind of left out in the lecture, is, and this is what you'll find when you go to seek help for depression. People understand this aspect, but they either completely dismiss or completely ignorant of these aspects. And you go to this person and they understand this aspect, but they know nothing of these other aspects. And this is why there are literally millions and millions and millions of people not getting the help they need. And that's when I started the Polar Bears, that's what was one of my main goals, was not to be just a singular aspect or direction. I wanted to be very multiple views, avenues, and ways of looking at things. Okay, so Robert Sapolsky, numerous factors. Psychology doesn't have all the answers. Neurobiology doesn't quite have all the answers. We have to knit them all together, and that's what I am trying to do, as impossible as that seems. But what can I say? Some people just like to take on the impossible. Okay, now questions. Now, these Sunday webinars, as much as you probably believe otherwise, I don't always like talking. I do like answering questions. And the other thing to keep in mind about these webinars is, I had 10 years experience as a teacher in the classroom. And this is in Asia. And in Asia, the students are kind of trained never to have questions. So when I went into a classroom, and I'm teaching whatever the topic was that day, and I'm looking around, and this is the big thing with the teachers, do they get it or not? Do they have questions? And there was a whole training process with every class I taught to get them, it's okay to ask questions. And so I have to go through the same process, I guess, with my audience here. People will be shy. People are shy about questions for all kinds of reasons. They're afraid they're going to ask a stupid question or an embarrassing question, or, it'll embarrass them or it'll embarrass me or something. There's a lot of reasons people don't ask questions. So I just kind of have to open up this whole question avenue. Is, there's, you can't ask a bad question. There's just no such thing as a bad question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. It's possible you'll embarrass me, but I have 10 years in the classroom with all ages. There's nothing you could possibly do that I wasn't put through before in the classroom, so that's okay. So with all that said and done, and look at that, 8 minutes. I said brief, I managed pretty briefly. So now I have to kind of go on the assumption that who's ever viewing has either listened to the lecture or read the companion post that I compiled and posted as promised. Now, the other thing, just one last thing on questions is it doesn't necessarily have to pertain to those talking points. You can, they can be about anything. I mean, if you have a question, because people are like this, they just have some burning question, and that's what they want answered. You can throw that out there. And the last thing, and here I am getting not brief again. I don't really have an avenue for critiquing type feedback. So you can also feel free to point things out Am I speaking too quickly? Am I speaking unclearly? Because for this to work, we have to sort out communication barriers. I have possible listeners from literally everywhere in the world. And, somebody in India can read me just fine, but maybe my spoken voice is hard to understand, or I speak too fast. So anyway, any question regarding, my presentation and the broadcast itself, those are welcome as well. Okay, so let's type those questions. So sorry, just to make clear the question process again, if you look at the screen, there's a little, well, it says say something. So that's up to you. You have to type in a question, and again, there's no bad questions. I won't. It'll be okay. So let's see some questions in there. I do have some email questions I can address if we don't get some live questions here. Okay, so I need a little music thing here to play while I'm waiting for questions. I'm still waiting for questions. Okay, so while you guys are pondering questions, I'm going to bring up the email question I got, because it was a pretty good one. Now, oops, no, I clicked in the wrong place and lost the question here. Okay, now the question was from Miss Anonymous. What can I do to avoid getting so exhausted when there are other people around me? Even if it is one friend, an old friend, it seems like I spring a leak and my energy is just sucked out. So that's kind of the symptom of what's going on. And she goes on to ask, is there a way to shield myself from other people's energies in public places, for instance? And then she explains she doesn't live in a place where she can withdraw from people, and then she goes on to say how tired she is and just feels too tired even to pick up the remote for the TV, which is a few feet away. Now, this is a really superb question that touches on a lot of the things I talked about in the lecture presentation on Wednesday. I really went on about the fatigue because it really is one of the most defining, frustrating, debilitating symptoms of really difficult depressive episodes. And this is kind of a good example of the fatigue, this fatigue to the point where they become vegetative states, catatonic states. And this psychomotor retardation, it just feels we can't move a muscle, we can't put two and two together in our brain. And, I could probably go on for 2 hours on this one topic alone. So let's review what's happening. So we're tying two things together, the fatigue and the difficulty of being around other people, even, and she mentioned two, regardless of whether it was somebody she knew, was comfortable with, and or out in public. Now, there are all kinds of things to consider here. So, again, sometimes it's hard to narrow these things down, but I think I would like to talk about highly empathetic people, which I've mentioned in several posts, and you know, this is one area where my personal experience and research, and when I say research, I always do two kinds: the, you know, academic type research and what I call field research, just following dozens and dozens of people and hearing what they're saying and their experiences. And this can be kind of a passive observation, or people, you know, as you know, I talk to a lot of people that I've met through the polar bears that are coming to me to try and understand what's going on. And, you know, and I ask questions and hear what's going on. And so this whole, you know, it seems to be a really an area of the human condition that I like to talk about that just seems to lack really solid investigation and understanding. So empathetic people, highly empathetic people, and this is what we're talking about. And highly empathetic means, in the sense I'm using it, and the sense some psychologists use it, is we can be hypersensitive to others around us. And even with this simple, relatively simple sounding observation, there are a number of possible avenues of explanation and understanding. But if you, to start, if you recall in the lecture, one of the talking points, where's my list here? One of the, oops. Hang on here. Oh, here we go. I referred to sensory changes and how we see, how we hear, our tactile sensations. There are changes there, and this whole idea of highly empathetic people or highly empathetic states is quite a bit what I was referring to there. Now, you know, when you talk to highly empathetic people and hear what their experience is, and this woman's experience is quite typical. And then I kind of look at all the possible, you know, neuroanatomy factors, and I've come across some really interesting stuff. You know, what's happening is our senses, for a number of reasons, are much more highly attuned than others. This is part of the experience of being highly empathetic. So when we are having a conversation with somebody and watching them, and just to touch on my post and concepts of reality, this is a great deal of what I'm talking about, because two different people could be in the same room having the same conversation with the same person, and they're each experiencing that experience, that situation, entirely differently. And this comes down to how our senses work, how our eyes gather and filter information, how our ears gather and filter sounds, and those kinds of things. So a highly empathetic person, you know, it's not in their eyes, it's how their vision is assembled in their brain, and then furthermore, how all the visual cues are analyzed for importance. So, you know, when we're talking to somebody, you know, their facial expressions, you know, how their mouth moves, their body language, all sends different messages. You know, what they're saying is just a small percentage of what's being broadcast. Now one person, their brain doesn't see that in so much detail. The highly empathetic person not only sees it in more detail, but likely attaches more meaning to it, and that can be emotional meaning, that can be several things alone. So to help you understand this, and how this ties into fatigue, the quote unquote normal person will say, who doesn't have this experience, it's there's literally, and this is not a knock on them, it doesn't mean they're stupid or anything, but that experience is just, there's less going on in the brain, there's less processing. Every brain process requires energy and power, and in a very literal, we're talking down to finer aspects of physics and stuff. So the one person, they're using way less brain energy and mental bandwidth to process just that person's body movements alone. The highly empathetic person is chewing up way more brain power, mental bandwidth, just simply processing that person's body movements and facial expressions. And not only that, emotional meanings and aspects involved there as well. And not today, but I just have an enormous amount to say on how that ties into many psychiatric disorders on a wide variety of scale. So that's just the visual aspect. The hearing aspect as well, the tone of voice. The person says a certain assembly of words that we take in as a sentence. I went shopping yesterday or something, and blah blah blah, this little brief story. And again, the two people listening, the one person just kind of takes it as just simple literal, oh, I went shopping, I had trouble finding fruit, I got confused about yogurt, blah blah blah. And that's it. It's just, okay, whatever. The highly empathetic person hears the same words, the tone of voice, the little aspects of the story, and puts, assembles their brain assembles a different picture of what all that means. And not only a different picture, but all kinds of added extra possible meaning and emotion. So again, this can trigger, all kinds of little mini stress response system. The person says, I struggled with yogurt. I don't know what goddamn yogurt to pick. Why does there have to be so much goddamn yogurt in the store? And the highly empathetic person is more likely to really connect with that and kind of feel the person's pain and confusion. So the highly empathetic person kind of takes on the other person's experience way more, the emotion of the experience. So it's like you're dealing in your own single brain, you're dealing with two people at once. Our brains aren't, they're a little bit designed for that. It's useful in a lot of ways, but constantly is way too much for our brains to handle in a very literal sense. So, so here's two aspects of just sensory differences. And if that's kind of clear, I hope that's clear. And what I found with every aspect of brain function, and in this case involving the just a simple experience, the two sensory brain functions involved with a simple face-to-face conversation with a friend, there could be multiple ways to look at it. Like I say, like certain cases of depression and certain things can lead to hypersensitization of sensory functions in the brain. So like I say often, it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. So were these sensory differences present from an early age, and led to these kind of experiences and then downstream symptoms, or is some kind of disorder change how a person's sensory equipment works, and then that just becomes part of the soup. And this is really hard to untangle. And in the end, my view is it doesn't really matter how it got there. It's just it's possible. Now her big question is there. No, sorry. Just before I move on to the how we might deal with that. So this is a single one-on-one experience. You go outdoors and there's, countless people and infinite variables of people interactions. And, when I talk to highly empathetic people, and there's a number of ways to look at that term. And the way I'm using it today is just, how our sensory equipment creates different experiences of person-to-person interactions. When I talk to people who identify as highly empathetic, and I've had some very good conversations about this and discussions, invariably there'll be a high degree of anxiety involved, because it just, it just literally sensory overwhelm all the time. And when we look at, now she mentioned the fatigue, but, when you have that fatigue, and we can kind of chalk this up under the general heading of negative experiences, and all creatures, we're every creature from the smallest, simplest creature to us humans, one of our basic brain survival things is, avoid negative, go towards comfortable. So, what you get here is a lot of, agoraphobia, the fear of going outdoors. Agoraphobia is a little more complex and a little bit different thing, but we can sort of start to see aspects of agoraphobia. It might not be, exactly a fear, as the phobia part of agoraphobia would say, but it does become something we just avoid. And I've been there. There was times I just, my sensory, and again, I'm bipolar. I can be way this way or way that way. But when I'm in certain states, and this is part of what made me a good photographer and good things, this stuff can be used for the good. But there were times, it felt like I go to a mall. It felt like I could hear every voice in the mall. And, when in certain psychiatric disorders, and you add in layers of a little bit of paranoia and fear, and, it's not only you feel like you can hear every voice in the mall, it feels like every voice in the mall is saying something about you. This is a classic cognitive distortion, but it feels very real when we're experiencing this. So that's, you not only can't feel like you can't hear, not only feel you can hear everybody in the mall, and it's just a complete unimaginable din. It's just like thousands, well, not thousands, but dozens and dozens of voices, and it feels like you can hear them. And, not only that, it seems like they're all saying something about you. They're judging your appearance, or they're saying something nasty about you. And, this is an unmanageable social situation. So you end up staying at home. So, back to the, let's go back to the question. So, it's, and again, the reader's specific experience, but as I said, this is not an uncommon experience or feeling with many people who identify as highly empathetic. What to do. And, avoidance obviously isn't a great strategy, and it's tragically what many people do. You'll see many people just end up being very closed in, very closeted, and this leads to a kind of isolation and loneliness that becomes a whole different contributor to psychiatric and various disorders. So that's obviously not what we want to do. So somehow we have to learn how to dial these things back. And, I just yesterday, as I was researching for a new post on music therapy, it's all doable. All this sensory processing stuff is changeable. This all comes back to neuroplasticity and understanding, how brain regions assemble these things. And it comes back to what I say over and over and over again. It doesn't have to be this way. As hard as it is, as real as the experience feels, and how, this is it, this is me, this is, I can't change this. And this kind of becomes a source of panic in itself. It doesn't have to be that way. All the little groups of neurons and the if you're familiar with my neuroscience post, I refer to short distance wiring and long distance wiring. Those things can change. That's why we talk about neuroplasticity. So there are ways, there's always several approaches. There are things we can do to calm that sensory equipment down and desensitize it a little bit. On the other side, it is just learning different coping strategies. And, and this is why I feel meditation is so important, because these things calm. When we learn to meditate, it's learning to calm this sensory information, and not just the sensory information. It's just, the sensory information demands some kind of response or thought pattern, and this is, comes back to another part of what goes on with the difficult empathetic experience with the conversation. We identify with the other person's experience, then our mind tends to go off on all kinds of thoughts. This comes back to why I preach thought control, and why it's important to learn strategies for that. So now I'm happy to report that I've been working with somebody with that very problem, and she's since reported that this has gone away quite a bit, and now she believes it's one way, but something like this complex is not going to be solved with one approach solution. So when I started working with this woman, I looked at her life and I go, okay, this diet is a horror show. This has to change. So she was just saying, okay, you just help me solve this. I just want all this to go away. So she was very good about taking instructions. Not all people are, but I said that this diet is a horror show. This has to change. I talked about the GI tract and the gut-mind connection. A lot of this sensory kind of overactive sensory equipment and this highly empathized mental states and experience does tie in very closely with the various mechanisms in the stress response system, and so does the gut. When you don't put good nutrition in your gut, your gut is constantly sending messages to the brain. You know, this is really, really elementary things of what the brain and gut are supposed to do: food intake, nutrition, and meet energy needs. And when we're not eating properly, those needs are never met. So the gut's always sending messages to the brain, you know, yo, not enough nutrition in the system, do something about it, do something about it. We keep eating garbage. The gut goes, no, 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 this is not what we need down here. So it sends more messages back to the brain, you know, nutrition deficit. There's little parts in the stress response system, the hypothalamus, different little aspects that are monitoring this all the time. And they're going, not enough nutrition in the system, not enough nutrition in the system. And this keeps it, it's kind of a low level stressor that just keeps this kind of stress response stuff locked on. Our senses, visual and auditory, are very, very key components of the stress response system. Very elementary stuff, in my view. You know, stress response isn't going to work if you're not hearing properly and seeing properly. So when the stress response system is kind of on high alert, it dials up the auditory and visual and tactile senses and olfactory senses. You know, everything gets put on high alert. You know, read more meaning into this, listen more carefully, you know, look for answers. This is what the stress response system is doing. I'm going to talk about all this. I'm getting ahead of myself. I have a whole thing on the whole stress response thing. So this is what's, you know, part of the soup of what's going on when we become highly empathetic. You know, we might have a genetic and you know, just might be the way our brains are wired and put together. We might be more visually attuned to things around us and hear better. And this is why, you know, I tie empathy and artists together. You know, they're good artists for a reason. They can see more detail and hear more detail. But that has to be dialed down and appropriated correctly. So, you know, again, coming back to what to do and what we did in this one case, you know, just starting something as simple as diet, and then, you know, just basically, you know, and I don't get into food politics and all that, but just something that's going to satisfy basic nutritional needs and keep your body metabolism more balanced and even throughout the day. You know, that dials down this kind of low-level nutrition deficiency, hunger signals, because when we're not eating nutritionally, the stomach's always going to be sending hunger signals. You know, even if we go eat 5 Big Macs and it goes, no, this is not the nutrition we're looking for, it'll keep sending the hunger signals, even though we've eaten, well, put a lot of stuff down there. So anyway, so we straightened out her nutrition. That made a near immediate difference. I remember her reporting. And then it was just, you know, looking into her life and a lot of other stressful stuff. And we got a lot of that kind of, so, you know, it took a lot of work. And this doesn't have, well, the food thing made a fairly immediate impact, but the other stuff was a lot of time and work. And, you know, slowly as we, you know, got, you know, a lot of these stressors settled down, the stress response system went into, you know, not such high alert all the time, and it calmed down. It calmed down. The senses start to calm down because the stress response system isn't communicating with the sensory input areas of the brain. You know, they send, okay, don't need to be on high alert, and everything starts to settle down a little bit. Now, this doesn't mean it's, you know, a person with really, truly more highly attuned sensory equipment, you know, is never going to be like the other person who simply doesn't get all that information the same way. But it does make a simple conversation much less fatiguing. You know, it does make going out into public less, again, it just dials down all the sensory equipment from high alert and reading so much meaning into everything. That gets dialed down. We dial those things down. The energy drain becomes less. Where brains are processing less stuff. The brain processes less stuff. That sends less energy demands to the whole. We get energy from two ways, from internal things, hormones, adrenaline and glucocorticoids, things like that are, kind of short-term energy bursts. We dial those needs down, we dial, and it all just kind of starts working together. And, and it's always a little bit of an ongoing process. But in the case of the question that came via email, see how, just some dietary changes, some learning to meditate, we want to, if our sensory organs and brain equipment are highly sensitized, we kind of got to reduce the stimulation. So calming music, calming visual things, meditation helps calm those things down, reducing stressors and in general kind of calms the whole stress response system down a little bit. We learn better coping mechanisms, reduce fear, just the fear of, because all this becomes very fearful and kind of panicky. So when we kind of dial these other things down, the little fear mechanisms in our brain start to calm down. And again, that triggers less of this super highly attuned sensory stuff, kind of calms it all down a little bit. Okay, so I hope, I could go on for another couple of days, so we better draw that to a close. But I hope that gives some good insight into the question we looked at with highly, kind of a highly empathetic base person, we shall say, and the experience of feeling drained by people. Now she asked, is there a way to put up a shield? No, wouldn't we all like a shield? Just some kind of magic, I don't know, plastic bubble that just blocked all this stuff out, but it doesn't work that way. But our brains actually can filter a lot of stuff. We don't have to take in so much. So, we can't have a magic umbrella shield or anything, but we can train our brains to not take in so much information, not attach so much meaning to that information. And this makes going out less difficult, maybe not completely easy, but less difficult, and then makes a nice pleasurable experience like visiting with an old friend less draining. Okay, so boy, that took up. So we have 20 minutes left. I need more questions. Like I say, I'm a teacher. My kind of teacher, this teacher anyways, loves nothing more than questions. And like I say, there's no such thing as a bad question. So fire away. You have to type something in the little say something box down there. I need the music again. I need Mrs. Bean here. This is when I need Mrs. Bean to come in and make an appearance. Okay, well, we don't have any questions apparently, which I frankly can't believe. It's not possible to talk about a topic like depression and not have any questions. So something's going on here. You guys are too shy, or actually, you know what? This is actually a really let's look at this. This is actually a really, really, really interesting aspect of this whole thing of suffering from depression. Hang on, I need to drink. Yeah, okay, I've got a lot to work with here. Silence. Speaking of being highly empathetic and perceptive, silence can be interpreted in a lot of ways, and we do that too. It's like, oh my God, it's silent. What's going on? And our brains start racing around trying to find meaning in the silence. But we'll work with the silence. So, one of the things I found with disorders, from depression, but especially with things like bipolar, schizophrenia, many things that are just simply kind of being different. Autism, there's lots of aspects of autism and Asperger's that tie in here. But anyway, the social stigma. We're the human species, and actually most species are like this, to be completely scientifically truthful. There's nothing particularly awful about human species. But anyway, it's just that the human species is very much like this. We're just very deeply hardwired to not like being ill, to avoid being ill, to avoid being around people who are ill. When we think of depression as an illness, this is kind of the downside to that. People, there's just so much shame and guilt. I talked about guilt in the list of symptoms, just feeling depressed, or, just feeling depressed alone. We're kind of, sort of hardwired and socially trained to feel guilt about not feeling well. You're depressed, you can't answer the bell, go to work, do your work properly, you feel guilty about that. We can't just say, if there's a place on earth, there's probably one or two, but not many. But I can't think of anywhere where you can call into work and say, I can't come into work today, I'm depressed. That they would howl at you, they would laugh, you just get, all kinds of social shame would just be heaped on you. And so we can't do that. Long story short, we end up being very silent about this. This is, long been recognized as a huge problem. It was the problem, or one of the problems I identified early on in understanding why so many people have some kind of mood disorder or psychiatric illness, but nobody talks about it. And there's just this shame that nobody can get over. And so, even in a relatively safe atmosphere like this, it just, if we just ask a simple question somewhere, this is kind of all deep psychology and stuff. We're afraid to ask that question because people become conditioned and fearful of admitting something like depression. And this is true with a lot of things. Like we can get a physical injury. We have to carry on. We sort of disguise it and hide it a little bit. It's on both sides, folks. We ourselves are kind of conditioned to hide what's going on, and that's important. There's a certain aspect of that that's important. It's not, we all have to do that a little bit, at least some, or else we'd never function. And then the other side of the coin is the shame that comes along with things like depression. There's just so much stigma of being weak. And this is why I really pounded on some of these things in the lecture, why it's important to get past these things. But all of this, whether it's our own kind of self-defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms, or what society kind of feels about this whole business, what we end up with, silence. And we all say, let's talk and let's be open. Let's remove the shame, the stigma. But anybody who's worked in this field or been in this field, and I kind of count myself as having been that for a number of years now, knows that it's much easier said than done. And I think what we're seeing here, this inability to ask questions, kind of exemplifies that. I've had some interesting conversations. I do a lot of this, talk about a lot of this in various places online. There's some Facebook groups, and I kind of, this is not so much anymore now, but for a while there, I was kind of looking at this mental health, brainy mental health hero person. And people, I met people would private message me and say, I love everything you're saying, but I can't like or comment on a post because I'm afraid my coworkers will see that and form some kind of judgment. And I just I was kind of shocked. And then afterwards, when I think about the whole picture of society and how we all are about these things, then I wasn't shocked. It was, it's perfectly natural, actually. Not good. I'm not saying that that's good, but it just seems to be a real natural way of how things work. So, and I think that's, the one question I got was via email, and then I could speak about that anonymously. So, it just, I think we can see something really interesting going on here, just how hard it is to talk about this, which brings me to the post. I may as well talk about something. I wrote a post a couple of weeks ago. This all kind of hit me in a big epiphany a few weeks ago, how much a role simple communication plays in the course of a psychiatric disorder or depression. There are no medical problems, or very few medical problems we can solve if we can't communicate about them. And this is actually really well understood in a broader context. Some medical problems, very, very obvious. You break your arm, you go into any hospital, you don't have to explain what's going on. They can see your arm's broken. But let's take that broken arm and say it's not healing properly, and it's still painful. Let's say that the brake didn't set properly, and it's kind of out of kilter a little bit, and the person still feels pain and some mobility issues. Now you take two different people with the same, the problem is precisely the same. But one person can communicate and is very, proactive and all these, he's not shy or anything. So he goes back to the hospital. Hey, doctor, you screwed up. Like this hurts. And he can accurately describe the hurt. So the doctor can visualize, what's going on. And he can accurately describe his mobility issues. And the doctor goes, okay, yeah, I can see exactly what you mean. They take another X-ray. Holy Christ, we screwed up. Okay, so they do what they have to do to fix it. And that guy, a couple of weeks or months later of rehab or whatever, he's off to the races. He's back to being, whatever, a baseball player, whatever he was doing. Now you take the exact same situation, but the person cannot communicate. They're shy. They don't know the language to express. They don't know how to describe the pain. Maybe they go back to the doctor. They sit there and maybe they're intimidated by the doctor. And anyways, no communication takes place. So if you can't communicate the problem, you're not going to get, like, something as simple as a freaking broken arm becomes a lifelong problem because, you know, there was no communication. The patient couldn't communicate. The doctor couldn't, you know, some doctors are very good at kind of, okay, this person can't quite describe it, but, you know, they maybe the doctor's a highly empathetic person and they could kind of get what the person was talking about, but a lot of doctors aren't. So anyways, no communication takes place. The problem persists, becomes a lifelong problem, alters the course of the person's life. He has to change jobs. He has to loses his home, all because he can't communicate. And this is not hypothetical. This actually goes on. Now you take something as you know, and if you watch the lecture, I don't know if many people did, but, you know, but I think you can understand, you know, how complex something like depression is, or it may not even start with depression. It just, something's going on in your mind that's different, and you don't know how to explain that to anybody. You know, it's most people don't even know how to explain it to themselves. So the problem, you know, the problem early on might be quite fixable, and you know, might you know, some really serious mental conditions start out. You know, this is some of the tragedy that I've seen in looking at all this the last number of years. You know, some cases start off relatively simple, like our broken arm analogy here. And because the person can't communicate, you know, you can't communicate, you're not going to get help. You're not, you know, if you can't communicate, you know, sort of identify and communicate the problem, you're not going to get help. You might try to communicate, you know, but run into some stigma problem and get kind of shamed and humiliated or something. This creates pain. You know, I'm never asking anybody again. I'm never talking about this again. Last time I just did this, I just got, you know, shamed and humiliated, and it was a painful experience. And then the problem persists. You know, other things start to begin to happen. The person's social life starts to get impacted. Education gets impacted. Future job prospects get impacted, and you know, again, this is not, you know, imaginary, hypothetical. These things actually happen. You look into certain cases, and you can see one little incident, and then the whole life gets changed, altered, because of way back in the beginning, no communication could take place. You know, it sounds kind of crazy to boil it down to something as simple as communication. But if we can imagine, you know, if we had a rewind button on this person's life and went rewound back to this point where something was going on, you know, and then what young person, you know, often this starts in teenage years. A remarkable amount of cases I look at and discuss or learn begin somewhere in the teen years, often earlier, childhood years. But so anyway, what if we could rewind, go back to this point in time where something was going on with this person? Some, you know, we all get existential questions, you know, about life, or you know, we're you know, teenagers are experimenting with you know, mating, finding a mate. You know, this is pretty basic life stuff, finding a mate and love and all this stuff. And you know, there's just going to be pain and heartbreak. Who knows? All kinds of possible things. And something's going on in the person, and they can't communicate that to somebody, or it's possible they are able to communicate but can't find somebody to hear. It just, this simple communication barrier can set off an entire life that comes out differently. And you know, and I can think of, I read watch a lot of biographies, and I can think of people who ended up becoming very successful at what they do, And, looking at these, the same starting point and two different narratives from a different way. Let's look at a different narrative outcome. The successful person can go back in their life and remember a really troubled time, and somebody, a teacher, a coach, a grandparent, or somebody just took them in and simply, heard what they were saying, gave them some sort of different avenue to deal with that, and their whole life turned out better. And there again, you can wind that back, that this bit of communication and understanding and solving the problem. We can have really different outcomes from, something solvable that is, we can communicate, ask questions, get answers, somehow create a communication. And communication can be a lot of different things. So I had this epiphany a couple of weeks ago about how often does this happen, where just a simple communication barrier either alters a person's life or prevents a person's life from getting the person getting the help they need, getting whatever it is the problem is, understood and untracked, some kind of course of action, and once we kind of have a problem understood, identified, and communicated, and some courses of action, the list of possible better outcomes is almost infinite. Just all kinds of doors and avenues of possibility open up, and and again, this is when I see our hours up. So, other than the email question, nobody really talked to me, but this is why having a highly empathetic person do this job is handy. Even if you're not saying something, I know what's going on in there. I'll root out the questions, even if you can't ask them. So, okay, our hour's up. Thank you so much for joining me. I think these kinds of sessions, we can explore these things much more interestingly in ways that will deepen your understanding and give you something to take away. Now, just briefly before I go, the hour is up, but I will be doing this as an ongoing thing. We will get better at this. I have some really interesting people who see what I'm doing and want to support me in this, that are going to help out with better software and platforms for doing these question and answer sessions. So, there's I never do anything without working at constantly improving it. So, we will get better at this. We'll create different ways of getting, communication. This is, coming back to communication. This is what this is about, people. You have to learn how to communicate better. As much as you would like some magician to magically know everything that's going on in your head, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. So, there's, as I said in that blog piece on communication and mental illness, it has to be a two-way thing. I'm a good listener. You say something, I'll hear you. I may not have the answer you want, but I'll hear you. And there's Mrs. Bean. But you also have to get better at communicating. And, on this topic, and before I sign off, I realize there's a real opportunity here for just simple workshops on communication, helping us all communicate better. We can all become better listeners. We can all become better speakers at communicating what's going on in this fantabulously complex thing that's between our ears and creating all these wild and wacky things we go through. Okay, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you again for joining. I will see you next Sunday. Next Sunday's topic was the stress response system. Oh my God, I'm going to be so excited. That's my favorite topic. You will not want to miss that. That is what you really, really, really have to understand. I think I gave you a taste of that today. So signing off, and we will see you next week, same time, same place. Bye now.